All right. We are back, everyone, and welcome to a new Take Aim podcast, and excited to be back. I know it's been a minute, and just this time of year right now is really crazy for me and a business that I run, and, you know, long story short, I've just been out of time, but excited to be back with Mike Stephan, my good buddy from Kansas, and get to tell the story of a deer called Oscar. And actually, Mike's been on the podcast a couple times talking about this deer, but I thought it was so important to get Mike back on. The story's not over yet. The chapter isn't closed, but just how the story progressed, what Mike has learned. And there's even, like, we couldn't fit it all in the podcast, but a bunch of stuff Mike told me offline, which is crazy, you know, about this deer and whatnot. But just the different aspects of how it started and how it's going now, and to potentially what he has figured out to be, hopefully, for Mike, the defining moment in the story of Oscar. And hope you guys enjoy. Like always, it's a great story, great podcast, and it's a heck of a deer, this Oscar, man. So hope you guys enjoy. Deer season never ends. We'll see you guys again next week. All right, boys and girls, we are live, brand new Take Aim podcast. Excited to be back. I know it's been a minute. I've had, like, legitly a ton of stuff, kind of personal and business going on at the same time. So trying to get, you know, life situated, and due to COVID, when you your business picks up, you know, you got to keep working. But excited to get back and talk with my good buddy, Mike Stephan, and from Northeast Kansas. And Mike's been on the show over the years a few times, but Mike, what's happening?
Oh, not much, man. Just trying to, you know, stay warm in these frigid temps we've had, record-breaking lows down here in Northeast Kansas. And I mean, I'm sure everybody's aware of, you know, the polar vortex or whatever that's hit the country, and basically, you know, Texas is not doing so good either.
No, it's not. You know, speaking of Texas, Mike, this is hilarious. So a guy who's in the industry, I won't mention his name, but he made like a pretty long post, and the first 4 words were, "You Michiganders," like laughing. Like, so he didn't say like Northeast Kansas or Oklahoma or Iowans. He said, "You Michiganders that are laughing at Texas, blah, blah, blah." I was like, dude, we get it. It's cold down there, but, like, maybe this is a blessing. You might get more cold weather in the future, and, you know, maybe this is a blessing so you guys can learn how to handle it. But I just thought it was hilarious. He literally called out Michigan in the first five words of this sentence.
That's funny.
It was funny. He's like, how dare you guys? But,
right.
You know, I was just telling Mike we were at -7, -8 yesterday morning when I was driving to the gym, which is really cold. But anyways, next week the forecast kind of changes for us a little bit. It's going to be like in the 40s, so hopefully we get rid of the temps, one thing, but I mean, you combine that cold temp, Mike, with, you know, 12 to 15 inches of snow, plus we have drifts. That makes it really hard on the deer.
Oh, man, I can't even imagine. Yeah, we don't get that much snow down here. We're sitting with, you know, a couple inches of snow right now, so the deer aren't too worried. I know the frigid temps definitely was probably a wake-up call for some of them, but you know, they're built for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, they are. Though, I mean, they can handle it, you know, and hopefully, you know, if this weather holds true, it's only really a week of you know, really a rough time, for at least for here in Michigan, you know, and I know, and I'm not making light, you know, by any means of what's happening down in Texas. I hope, you know, I mean, from livestock to the wildlife, you know, I know it's probably really a culture shock to those animals, and, you know, obviously I don't want any of them to pass away because of the weather, but hopefully that improves too. But it looks like, you know, it's starting to turn the corner here, hopefully next week.
Yeah, it is. I think we've got a day next week that the high is going to be in the 70s or something, so it's just crazy how
that's going to be
so
nice. Yeah, that'll be like a shock too, man. You'll be outside, Mike, with like your Speedo on.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
That first warm day, it always feels like it's 30 degrees warmer than it actually is.
Oh, man. I mean, we've been, down in the negatives here, and yesterday I think it was like 8 or 9 degrees, and I was walking around outside, and I was like, man, this ain't that bad.
No. Yesterday it was odd, like, for it being, it was -8 when I walked outside, but by the time I was driving down the road, it was -7. But there was no wind, and it's crazy what that will do. Like, you can almost, like, oh, I can handle this. It's just that wind chill that makes it so rough. But, yeah, it was kind of weird to feel like, God, that's not too bad. Like, when it hits 30, I'm going to be, like, sweating, It's going to be crazy.
Right.
But
yeah, no, that wind is definitely what knocks you out.
Oh, 100% for sure. But anyways, man, excited to have you back on, and excited to kind of recap and kind of regroup with you, because for many of us, it's like a deer hunter's dream, which obviously, Mike, to have a big deer and to be able to grow, some history with that deer over the years. And Mike's been hunting a really cool deer named Oscar for the past couple of years. That's just to me is world class, this deer. And every year there's something new to the story. So I thought it was, just a great time to get back with Mike and kind of just go along with the progression of this deer and Mike's tactics and the hunts he's had and what he's learned, and just kind of going into the future, what small, like macro, micro adjustments Mike keeps making every year to really kind of hopefully this year kind of end the chapter on Oscar.
Yeah, this deer is he's something. I mean, I don't want to sound like some of these guys were like, oh, I've learned so much in 1 year and about a deer and about deer hunting, but I will say this deer has put me through the ringer, and I learned so much and gained so much experience just hunting this deer over the past couple of years, that obviously, I wouldn't have learned or experienced if I was just out hunting to shoot whatever walks by.
Yeah, for sure. It gives you, a couple things. Like, Mike's chosen really to go after this deer, and obviously it creates discipline, but it creates a different, relationship with the hunt and what you're hunting when your sole focus is one deer. And it's, Mike, you can tell us, but it's a lot to kind of put that on your shoulders and say, that's what I'm committed to.
It's some of the most stressful situations I've ever, been in and dealt with. This deer has really changed my opinion and everything on what these big deer do and how they interact with other deer and pressure and it's just pretty crazy, all the things that have gone on with this deer and the fact that he's still around and still very ghost-like, but I didn't have a single encounter with him this year, but I've got pictures and videos from trail cameras like crazy. I'm very vigilant about the wind direction and my access and everything else. And this deer just is on a whole nother level of careful, and it's nuts. Now,
Mike, I know, like, through, some of the history more than the listeners, because obviously you would have to go back if you hadn't heard, or remember Mike talking about this deer, but you would have to go back. But, without getting too crazy, Mike, I know you've had situation where he's been close, you couldn't get shots, this and that, adjustments for the wind. But I know, like, this year you've had some new things come up with the neighbors and stuff like that. So kind of piece us in on what you think has changed. And I know, obviously, for those that don't know, Mike works for Rick and Julie Kruder and Beyond the Hunt. So it's not like Mike is, getting to sit in a tree every single day with the sole purpose of killing Oscar. But, sometimes schedules dictate that. But tell us what you think changed this year, Mike, and, what adjustments from there. You said you didn't end up seeing the deer on the hoof, but you got pictures. So what adjustments do you think, correlation-wise between the two?
So the past 2 years that I've been hunting this property, when I first found out about Oscar, he didn't show up on any cameras until the middle to late October. So I thought I had him kind of figured out where, he was spending his summers and early season somewhere else, and then showing up, in October, mid-October, late October, to kind of, start off his rut. And so that's kind of the way I went about chasing this deer for the past couple of years. And, I put an arrow in him, high shoulder, year one, just kind of it was a really lucky situation that I wasn't able to hunt basically the whole first half of November that year, because I was out filming. And then I literally had 1 day to hunt between filming days. And that day was, bitter cold and snow on the ground, and got those deer moving. And, obviously looking back on it, I think the reason, I had an opportunity at him that year on that day was just because I wasn't spending any time in there. And so, he felt comfortable, and everything just kind of lined up to get an opportunity at him. And I made the mistake on the shot, and I actually think I've finally figured out what it was that why I hit him so high, because he was only at 17 yards. It should have been a chip shot, but I was not practicing with my lighted knocks, and just this year I put the same lighted knocks on the arrows that I had shot him with 2 years ago, and I was practicing in the backyard. And when I was getting to full draw, because that lighted knock was just a little bit wider than the knocks that were on my arrows, the way the D-loop on my string was tied, it was pinching that lighted knock and actually lifting the arrow up off of my rest.
The string, off the rest. Okay.
Yeah. So, I was 30 feet in the tree, so that had something to do with it. But when your arrow's not laying on your rest, obviously when you release, it's going to be a lot higher than it should be. So I think I figured that out, which absolutely sucks. But at the same time, I wouldn't have all this experience and all these stories chasing this deer.
That's right.
For 2 years to come.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I thought I had him figured out, and then towards the end of last year, I didn't have any encounters with him in the stand last year either. But again, a ton of pictures and videos and stuff. And towards the end of last year, the way this property's set up, I park at the end of a dead-end road, and then I walk into the corner of the property. And, this being that this is a new property, and it's, it's all timber. There's no open areas. There's no crop or anything, but there's ag fields and whatnot around on the edges of the property on the neighbors. But I had figured that, I wanted to be basically into the middle of the property where there were some natural funnels and saddles and stuff, because it's got some pretty big hills inside the timber. And that's where, I spent most of my time hunting, and spent most of my time running trail cameras there, and kind of in the middle of the property, and basically, didn't spend any time and kind of neglected the first half of the property that I walked through to get back to where I was spending most of my time hunting. Well, last year I ended up setting up some cameras, kind of in that first section of the property that I walk through to get back to where I usually hunt. And I started getting pictures of him, basically within a couple hundred yards of where I parked my truck at the end of the road. And I thought, my goodness, I've messed up. This deer, I'm walking through to go hunt him into the middle of the property, and he's walking between me and my truck, so he's got me figured out already. And so going into this year, my plan was to, set up those cameras early in that first section of the property and try and get them figured out. And sure enough.
Hey, Mike, to go along with that, did you happen to change that access or where you parked?
I didn't change access or where I parked, and that's because I literally have no other option.
Sure.
There's only one way. There's only one way to drive to that corner of the property, and that's at the dead end road. Now I can go around to the north side, and I've got permission from one of the neighbors to walk down his fence line to get to the other corner, the north corner of the property. But that would, to hunt this deer, I would have to walk all the way through, the property to get to where he's spending his time. So
right, which would be unnecessary.
Yeah, and I would blow all the other deer out in the process, and that's just not what I want to do. But so I got some cameras set up in July, maybe mid-July this past year in 2020, and I and it must have been the end of August, I would have been checking cameras to kind of get things figured out before our season starts mid-September. And I actually was getting pictures of Oscar, and it's the first time I've ever had pictures of him, before mid-October, and it's the first time I ever had pictures of him in velvet, which was really cool. And from the first year when I shot him to the second year, it looked like he probably went downhill a little bit as far as score. I would assume that injury of me hitting him in the shoulder, stressed him out, and so he didn't really grow. Well, from last year to this year, he put on inches, and he's big. So that was exciting. I thought, I'm going to have an opportunity to hunt him early, and maybe get an opportunity at him before he, starts going all over the place during the rut. Because the first year that I was in there hunting him, he spent most of November right there in the property chasing does and breeding does and everything. And then the second year, I thought it was going to be, a similar story. Well, he basically completely disappeared on me during the majority of the month of November, other than, a picture here or there. And then
you think that was because he was actually living somewhere else, Mike, or do you think he basically just got on does and kind of got in an area where, it was maybe a bunch of does kind of collectively bedding and he kind of was just on a breeding pattern?
I think this is speculation, but I think what happened was this property holds a lot of deer to begin with, and I have several other bucks that are 4 and 5 and 6 years old. So there's a lot of competition, and I think that first year that I was in there, he was top dog. And then year 2, I think what happened is he kind of got bumped out by some other more aggressive bucks, and so he ended up spending his time elsewhere during the rut. Because he came right back, to later in the season. So I think it had more to do with him not wanting to deal with competition. And obviously he found some does elsewhere to go take care of. So I think that's the main reason why he kind of disappeared on me. And he actually disappeared on me again this year. Similar situation. He, it was mid to late October. He completely disappeared off the cameras.
Oh, dang, that's crazy. But it makes sense. We all know deer have personalities. Some are aggressive, some are anti-aggressive. So, it totally makes sense if you get, Oscar's probably getting up in that age now where he's like, you know what, I don't have the energy, or I'm smart enough not to expend the energy to be running around here fighting you guys.
Yeah. And that first year that I was hunting him, I looking at the pictures of him and the videos and stuff, I thought for sure he was a 5 or 6 year old deer that first year. So that would put him at 7 or 8 this year.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to wonder if maybe he was only 5 or 6 this year.
Oh, okay. So he's much younger when you first saw him.
Yeah, so I'm thinking he was probably 4 2 years ago. So I'm guessing him to be 6 this year. So going into the 2021 season, he'll be 7.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see what he does antler wise between last year and this year, between 6 and 7 years old.
Right.
Because they say, everybody's always wanted to try and hit that 4 and 5 year old mark, and this deer's already at least 6. And I know I've heard a lot of guys say that, especially recently, some of these guys that are able to let these deer get to 7 or 8 years old, that they actually end up having some of their largest antlers in that year 7 and 8.
Yep. Well, proof's in the pudding, so to speak. Every place is different. Everybody has different management goals. But if you're to look at just overall, and Mike, and that's like in Texas, they don't even say it's a go till they hit 6.5. You got to hit 6.5 first before they're even interested in potentially killing that deer. So that goes to tell you, well, they're not just hunting deer for 1 year. That goes to tell you that potentially they can have some of their biggest wrecks, like you just said, at 6, 7, and 8 years old. And I know it's maybe more uncommon because, one, they don't reach that age very often, but, I'm good friends with a biologist down there that he said several times he saw some of his biggest deer at 9 years old. So that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I firmly believe, obviously genetics play a role in how big a deer is going to get, but I really do firmly believe that one of the largest factors in antler growth from year to year is stress, whether it be, drought stress or just human contact or if the coyotes are really bad or, if that buck has to spend more of his energy in survival mode trying to just live, he's not going to do as well as a deer that's going to basically sit fat and happy and not have to worry about what's going on around him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts of, antler growth and health and stress and food and, it goes on and on. But without a doubt, whatever he did at, what we think now is 6, he's on the right path because, like you said, he did kind of blow up, and he's blowing up the right way. You can tell it. Oscar is putting on that mass everywhere, and he's getting that I'm older type of junk, that thick kind of gnarly stickers and bases, and, so hopefully, like you said, Mike, fingers crossed he stays healthy and, this winter doesn't treat him too bad, and he can, head into spring and see what happens, man. I'm really excited about that, and hopefully, we'll get onto this later, but hopefully you get a chance to get out there and shed hunt too. I would die to see those sheds off him.
Yeah. He so that first year when I put an arrow in him, he dropped his antlers super early. It was like between November 27th and December 6th, I think, is the pictured time difference between when he had his antlers and when he didn't. And obviously that was due to him being super stressed with being wounded. And then last year he didn't drop until, end of February, like most normal bucks around here do. And then this year, he finally, shows back up on camera, kind of must be done doing his rut thing, and he's bouncing around the property, and his movements just absolutely didn't make any sense to me. There were days that he was walking through at noon and 1 o'clock, and I mean, on days that don't have, weren't special, we didn't have a cold front and then a cold snap, or the pressure wasn't doing, it just, all the things that people talk about that get big deer up and moving, those days weren't the days that he was up and moving. But he ended up dropping his antlers between December 16th and the 20th this year. Wow. So I still had the whole last half of December that I was planning on getting after him once he showed back up on the property, and then he goes and drops his antlers. So I kind of the wind fell out of my sails, and I started I actually, for a little bit, I was like, well, I'm done hunting. I'm not even gonna go after any of these other deer. But I did end up trying to shoot another deer, and just was unfortunate circumstances on the last day of the season. But anyway, back to Oscar. He disappears off the cameras late October, and I think I got maybe two or three pictures of him through the basically through the whole month of November, and it was 2 a.m. or whatever, just cruising through. So he was obviously spending most of his time somewhere else. And so I actually share this property with another guy as far as hunting permission. This other guy that hunts, he grew up right down the road from the property, but now he lives in Colorado. And he comes out every year and bow hunts the first 2 weeks in November. He's not a real picky hunter, so that keeps me sane most of the time, because he'll spend the first week holding out for that bigger buck, but then he'll sling an arrow at a basically just a meat buck when it gets down to the wire. But this year, the first half of November, as I'm sure most people would attest to, was one of the weirdest rut years that I've ever had. And it just because it was warm, but it was almost always a south wind, and that's like the worst wind direction for me to go after any deer really in that property, because I can access it from the north and hunt it, but the majority of the deer activity is on the south end of the property. So and that's where he's spending most of his time is on the south end. Oscar is. So going into this year, this guy shows up from Colorado, and over the past couple of years we've gotten to know each other and text back and forth, and I'll text him some pictures of bucks and ask him how he's doing and stuff. But I don't know whether or not he knows about Oscar, but I have not asked him or sent him pictures.
And he hasn't volunteered?
He hasn't volunteered the information, so I'm not going to volunteer the information. Not that he doesn't have just as much right as I do to the deer, but I've spent a lot of time and money running cameras and everything, so he shows up, puts a few cameras out on the property for the 2 weeks he's here, and then pulls them and leaves. So there's a chance that he knows that he's around. But regardless, this year with all those south winds, this guy was going in from the end of the dead end road every day, basically, with a south wind. So he's walking into the property with the wind at his back, blowing everything out that's in there, and he's just going in and hunting. And I understand that coming from out of state, you've got a limited amount of time, and you got to do what you got to do. I get that, but at the same time, I just don't understand why you would waste your time walking into a property with the wind at your back if you know that all the deer that you are going to have an opportunity at are getting blown out. But
right.
It is what it is. I think that had something to do with Oscar not showing up very much during that time as well, just because not to mention that he's blowing his scent in there when he walks in to hunt every day, but also just the ground traffic. He's not just going in a little ways and setting up. He's walking all over, and he put his cameras out, and so there was definitely a lot of pressure put on him during that time. But going back to September, when I was getting pictures of Oscar, I thought I had him pretty well figured out. He was actually going through a low spot, or I guess a high spot in the fence onto the neighbors, where there was like a little ditch that runs down, and the ditch had washed out underneath the fence, and it leaves a pretty big space for deer to go under the fence, so they don't have to spend that, expend that energy to jump over. So that's where I was actually catching him more often than not, was in that gap. And he was heading from his bedding to the cornfield that was down to the west. And I had that camera set up, and it was a spot that I had seen when I was shed hunting, and it actually was just down the fence from where I ended up finding his sheds last year, which a whole nother story. I found his sheds from last year, and that same day found his sheds from the year that I shot him that had been chewed up from squirrels and stuff, all in about 10 minutes, and it was they were all sitting within 100 yards, 200 yards of where I parked my truck to go hunt.
No kidding. And describe that area, Mike, because it sounds like he uses it a lot. And you said that's before really the big, thick timber. So is it just mostly a draw with tall grasses or some scrub brush, or what's in there?
Basically, how everything's set up is the property that I have permission to hunt is the majority of it is old growth oaks and hickories and walnuts, a lot of big timber. There is the section that he spends most of his time in or going through is the section that I come through there when I first get into the property, and it has a lot more hedge trees in it. So there's a lot more understory. There's a lot more side cover. And I that's what I've come to find out, that he prefers going through areas in the timber that provide him a lot of side cover. He doesn't particularly like spending much time in the more open, big hardwoods. So what's happening is the neighbors to the east is actually a piece of property that nobody is allowed to hunt. It's kind of a preserve, if you will, because nobody has permission to hunt it, and there's not supposed to be anybody in there. And it's really thick, nasty, old, grown-up pasture land that's just covered in cedars. So that's kind of the sanctuary that most of the deer spend their time bedded in. And he'll go from the neighbors and all that cedars and stuff, and he'll cross through where I can hunt, and then he basically kind of cuts the corner off of the property that I can hunt, and then goes through a fence to the south and ends up on the other neighbors, and goes west and ends up down at a crop field to the west. So he's kind of he's not spending a whole lot of time on the property that I can hunt. He's kind of just crossing through, using it as a transition between his bedding and where he's going to feed. But I will say that I know for a fact he does sometimes bed on where I can hunt, because the second time that I was headed down to pull that card on the camera that's on the fence gap, I got down into the woods a little ways and bumped a deer, and I pulled the binoculars up, and it was kind of trotting off through the woods, and it was him early in early September, not long before the season started. So somewhere around the 8th or 9th, I think, is when I bumped him out of his bed right there. I mean, he was bedded 150 yards from the truck where I parked. So he does I mean, obviously in the summer and early fall, when before all the leaves had fallen off the trees and the understory is a lot thicker and there's a lot more cover, he'll deer will spend time bedded on the property that I can hunt on.
Now, Mike, do you think that's kind of where he goes to a little bit, maybe over to that neighbor side, the east side, when he disappears, or kind of that pressure gets going a little bit, or even with the rut kicking in, and do you potentially believe that's kind of his area somewhere in there?
I still haven't 100% figured that out. It wouldn't surprise me. I know that he spends a lot of time over there, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if he kind of basically his home range during the rut shrinks quite a bit, and he just spends time running circles in that quote unquote preserve property.
That would make sense.
Because I mean, he's not getting pressured. He's not. Right. There's not anybody around, and
right.
The guy that comes in and bow hunts from Colorado, he's obviously not going in there. So, all that activity that's on the property that I can hunt pushes Oscar over on that preserve property, and basically he's just gonna spend most of his time over there chasing does and whatnot.
Yeah, that would make total sense to me. So, kind of, let's say, leaping into the future, Mike, from July till September-ish, again, you start running cameras and figuring things out again with them. Is your goal, are you kind of moving that timeline up now that you've noticed that guy from Colorado and his pressure has kind of changed things? Are you going to try to, figure out the best days to, weather prediction, camera, whatever it is, to get the job done before you kind of rely on that more daytime movement during the rut?
Yeah, so going into this next year, after everything that I've learned from this year, when I had him figured out going through that fence gap, I should have capitalized because, he was daylight. He was, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. pretty much, not every day, it was every few days or whatever. And I'm sure if I went back and looked at the weather, there was probably some sort of a pattern to why he was daylighting on those specific days. But I should have got in there and got after him right away,
Mike,
having that kind of figured out.
Tree stand in there, or can you do a brush and a ground blind? Like, what kind of fence row is it? It'd be a tree. I actually ended up putting a tree stand in there and trying to hunt him in that spot. Oh, perfect.
But it was too late.
Okay.
He had already it was mid-October by then, and everything had changed, and their minds were on other things. So I should have got in there a lot earlier. I messed up. So going into this year, I'm going to kind of take that similar approach, and I've invested in a lot more cell cameras this past year just to keep that, that pressure down. And so I'm going to be going in, probably 1st of July to set cameras. Maybe even middle of June, just to, keep things as unpressured as possible, to set cameras on some of these spots that I know he has been through this past year. And from the intel that I have on him, he's not going anywhere. This is his core area. This is where he's going to spend his time. So I'm going to get these cameras set up and just stay out. Because I didn't, basically all last summer, I didn't spend any time in that property whatsoever. I didn't go put cameras up. I didn't go put tree stands up. I absolutely didn't go in there at all. And I know, that there's, nobody else is going in there either. So,
right.
That basically, for months and months, nobody being in there, he went back to his normal routine through the summer. And I hope that his pattern doesn't change much. I've gathered a lot more intel on him. I've been really hush-hush with the neighbors around that adjoin the property. And I finally decided that me knowing the information on where Oscar spends his time was more valuable than
pretending like they don't know he's alive.
Yeah. So I actually the guy that hunts the property to the west where the ag field is actually a friend of mine that I used to work with at Cabela's, and we had talked back and forth quite a bit about the deer he sees and stuff, and I just never talked to him about Oscar, and he never said anything about him either. Well, this year I finally broke down, and in November when I was having such terrible luck trying to find him, trying to find Oscar, I was like, I have to get the intel, whether or not, he knows about Oscar or not. The intel on Oscar is more valuable. So I got a hold of him and we chatted for a while, and I said that I was after this really big deer, and then showed him pictures, and he was like, oh yeah, I've got pictures of that deer. So we went back and forth, and yeah, Oscar was spending his summer back and forth to that cornfield that was down there.
Right.
And that's, that basically put the A and B points together, and I was between the A and B points, and now I have a better understanding of his destination, which is going to help me tremendously this year on where I set my trail cameras and where I decide to hunt. So I think just for some of those other guys that are out there and are worried about their neighbors shooting that big buck that they're after, it would really suck if this guy shot the deer and I didn't. But at the same time, it's kind of fun being able to go back and forth with him on with pictures and talking about other bucks and Oscar and what's going on. And now that I have him, he's running cameras down there too and whatnot, and for this summer, it's going to be huge for me to put together, get
that intel.
Okay, so Oscar goes through the fence on this day at this time, and then he shows up down there at that ag field at this time. So, it took him, this much time to get down there. Where's he at? What's he doing? Where's he bedding? All of that is going to come into play this year, and having that added intel on his destination is going to be huge.
Yeah, for sure. That gives you a lot more MRI. You're getting that most recent information now quite a bit, and now it has. Maybe it was a thought in your mind because hey, it's food, and he's going to a destination food, crop field or food plot somewhere. And now you've confirmed like that is for sure one of his destinations where he likes to feed. And from there, like you said, man, that it's going to be pretty unique for you to figure out that pattern on how long does he go for? Is he really, does he go over there for a day or two, or is it just for a few hours? Does he feed and come back? So that will be kind of neat for you to put that part of the puzzle together.
Yeah, for sure. And The only thing that's going to change is obviously the crop rotation, so it won't be corn this coming year. It'll be beans. So it'll be interesting to see, how that changes his movements. But I'm gonna guess that it doesn't change that much. I mean, obviously deer will eat corn and beans during the summer, but beans is the preferred menu item. So maybe it'd even be an advantage for me that it's going to be beans this year because he'll spend more time, or there'll be a easier pattern to follow.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely believe it probably would be, for sure. So, I mean, that kind of wrap things up, Mike, in an overall kind of 10,000-foot view. It seems like over the years that we've talked and talked exclusively about Oscar, that you've kind of went from figuring out a spot in the timber that you're like, I can only hunt this, maybe at the time, if I remember, Mike, it probably was that south wind, but to now adapting to learning that guy and that guy's hunting pressure and what he's done, to figuring out, Oscar no longer even lives here during the rut because maybe he's, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, he's aged up. He kind of avoids that stress. And now to figure out this last part, with the crops and, where he likes to spend like a lot of his summertime and his lazy time putting on velvet, whatever you want to call it, it sounds like you're just, now that one step closer. But the point to that being is, Mike, obviously this works for you. It can work for everybody. There's always something to learn every single year when you're hunting these big deer. But, if I
100%, yeah.
If I was incorrect with any of that process and your steps, Mike, from those stories in the past, correct me. But I feel like, that was a very slim version of what we've talked about, but maybe kind of overall the same concept.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. That's the full gamut of how the past couple of years have been. And I will say, I don't want to be too confident in my ability to kill him this year. I've been, bow hunting him and actually have took the rifle out during the Kansas rifle season the past 2 years as well. And this year I'm gonna try and bust out the muzzle loader for the first week or 2 weeks of the Kansas season.
Yeah.
In September, just to give me a little bit more of an advantage. And I firmly believe that the spot that I'm going to be able to kill him is right at that fence gap. Because what happens with that fence gap is it alters his movement in a way that I can kind of capitalize. Right. And by that I mean the fence runs east and west, and obviously he's going to come from the south and go
north.
Go north through the fence onto the property that I can hunt. And generally, what's happening is he's coming back onto the property that I can hunt, and in the morning after he spent his night down at the ag field. Right. And then in the evenings he comes through from the property that I hunt and goes south, onto the neighbor's property to head to that ag field. And that little section in the fence there is going to be able to let me hunt him on a wind that gives him the advantage.
Sure. That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically my plan is to set up, just east of that fence gap, and probably hunt them in the morning, early season, which, doesn't make a whole lot of sense for most guys to hunt mornings. But if Oscar follows that pattern and he's getting back to his bed late in the mornings, he's going to be, heading from the south to the north with a north wind, so he's going to feel safe coming through that fence gap with the wind in his face, but I'm going to be tucked in, a tree stand just a little bit further east of there, So basically my wind is going to be kind of parallel to his movement.
Right.
So that's that's kind of my plan right now, going into this next season.
Yeah, that's perfect, man. So obviously I hope it works out, and I hope that between the podcast and this deer that we end up writing a really awesome story together for North American Whitetail or something.
It'd be insane. It would be insane. I've been out looking for his sheds already quite a bit, but we've had a bunch of snow on the ground recently, and obviously he dropped his antlers back in December, so they'd be partially buried right now, and so I'm just decided to wait, and actually most of the other bucks on the property have already dropped their antlers now with this cold spell that we've had, so I'll be getting back out pretty soon.
Perfect, man. Well, I'm excited to hear about that, and obviously, we talked throughout the year. I'll be excited to follow up with, the progress from, shed hunting to summertime and velvet time and getting ready for you to hunt. So, but awesome story, and again, just cool to hear, how it's changed, and, even simple things like don't overlook a fence row or a fence gap or a fence jump. Those are things deer use to their advantage, exactly like Mike just described. Advantage to his wind, to his nose, and he's using, a spot where just by nature they're lazy. He doesn't have to jump, so that just is, kudos to Mike for figuring that out. Like, that could be the golden ticket, Mike, and again, man, I hope it happens for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope it does too.
Yeah, for sure. But as always, Mike, let everybody know where they can find you, Instagram, Facebook.
Instagram is just Bear Ridge Mike. Facebook, Mike Stephan, Stephan. I've kind of shied away from doing a whole lot of social media stuff, but every once in a while I'll make some posts.
He gets on there and throws it down sometimes, but and also you can kind of live through on the Beyond the Hunt Instagram too, because Mike's always around doing stuff with Rick and Julie. So, but
yep,
awesome story, Mike, and can't wait, and wish you nothing but the best of luck. And as you guys know, you'll find us next week right here on iTunes, Outdoor Podcast Channel, Amazon Music, YouTube. And thanks so much, Mike. We'll talk again real soon.
Sounds good, man.